I developed the electromagnetic soul theory after years of research. And in fields of faith, we call our soul, or we call it a soul or a spirit. In science, we refer to it as consciousness. It's the who and what we are. And every great spiritual teacher, from ancient India through Zoroaster, Moses, Buddha, Jesus, Muhammad, Confucius, Lao Tzu, I mean, all the way up to modern day, the religions of Africa and the Pacific, describe how the soul, the who and what we are, pre-exists the body, comes into the body, moves on after the body dies. And we know from the law of thermodynamics that energy is neither created nor destroyed, only transferred from one form to another. We also know from the neurobiology, neuroscience, that the brain has an electromagnetic field. And it's only 2% of the body's weight, but it uses 20% of the body's energy. So there's a lot going on there. And so everything is made of molecules. We know this from science, which in turn are made of atoms, which in turn are made of electrons, protons, and neutrons, which in turn are made of a smaller particle of electromagnetic energy known as a quantum. And for all of our science fans, an electron is a quantum because it's 1/1800th the size of a proton. All right, so we covered that. But what that means, Faust, and I know that you understand this, but for the benefit of the listeners, everything on the subatomic level is made of the same electromagnetic energy. And that means you and me, our bodies, the microphones we're speaking into, the radio waves that the show is being broadcast, that's electromagnetic energy, the light from the sun, the surface of Mars, and beyond are all electromagnetic energy. So I developed the term the electromagnetic soul to explain what we really are, which is pure consciousness that is eternal electromagnetic energy.
Welcome to Far Out with Faust, everybody. I am Faust Chicho, and today I'm excited and honored to be joined by the one and only Mark Anthony JD, psychic explorer, also known as the psychic lawyer. Let me tell you about this incredible man and what he's been up to. Mark is a renowned fourth-generation science-based evidential psychic medium who communicates with spirits. He's the author of the groundbreaking and critically acclaimed spiritual bestsellers, The Afterlife Frequency, Evidence of Eternity, and Never Letting Go. His credentials and experience are unparalleled in the paranormal world. He's an Oxford-educated trial attorney licensed to practice in Florida, D.C., and before the United States Supreme Court. In England, he studied mediumship at the prestigious Arthur Findlay College for the advancement of psychic science. His book, The Afterlife Frequency, The Scientific Proof of Spiritual Contact and How That Awareness Will Change Your Life, bridges the divide between faith and science, the cosmic and the subatomic, and it delves into the very fabric of the human soul and existence itself. It's a award-winning book that I've only got about halfway through, and I wish that I have had. I'm going to finish it, but it's an incredible book that I'm really enjoying, and we're going to talk a lot about it. Mark, thank you so much for making time and for beaming in. I appreciate it.
I appreciate that, Faust. It's great to be here. I've been really looking forward to this show.
Awesome, my friend. Thank you so much. Yeah, it's been, man, I got this on my schedule. This is probably the furthest out I've booked a podcast since I started a few years ago. So very exciting. It's very exciting.
Well, thank you. And yeah, it's funny because we've been trying to coordinate this for such a long time. And then today, the day that we're recording this, opened up. And so
Nice.
it's been
Synchronistic.
Synchronistic is the right word.
Yes, that's right. I love that word. So Mark, let's start a little bit towards the beginning. I mean, this has to have been an incredible journey. It's such a unique situation where, you have parents who are also involved in mediumship, and
yes,
and then there's your childhood, and there's also this amazing career path you've chosen. And so I feel like we have to start at least at the beginning a little bit, so my listeners can get a sense of how you came to be where you are. I mean, just having parents, how did that change everything and shape you?
Without going too deeply into my family background, which is what's pretty interesting, and I chronicle that in all my books, in Never Letting Go, Evidence of Eternity, and in the Afterlife Frequency. I reveal a lot of stories about my family's psychic heritage, but my dad was a U.S. Navy SEAL, and then after the Navy, he became an aerospace engineer. And my mom was a commercial artist, illustrator, fashion designer. So, for all intents and purposes, we were the all American family next door, except that my parents could see dead people. And when I was 3.5, I started seeing them too. And the reactions were very different. My mom was all excited, like, oh, he can do this. And my dad was like, oh, geez, he can do this. And it's that was based also on each side of the family. My mother's family was of Italian descent, and my maternal great grandmother Giovanna was a very gifted psychic medium, and she came to the United States from Italy. In the North New Jersey and Little Italy community of New York City, she was known and respected as the woman who knows things. And the Catholic Church actually accepted her her abilities very well, and cardinals would consult with her, bishops, priests, nuns. I mean, they would come to her home and seek her advice. And then my mom had these abilities as well. So that side of the family looked at it as a gift. Meanwhile, my dad's family hailed from northern Pennsylvania, and they were very conservative Baptists, Northern Baptists. And it's funny because people say, oh, your family's Baptist. I go, Northern Baptist. And, it's like, oh, well, that's not Southern Baptist. Like all churches, they're different in different areas. But my dad's family, he had 4 siblings. He had 3 sisters and a brother. And one of his sisters, Marjorie, also had these abilities, as did their mother, Isabel, and their maternal grandmother, Grace. But they kept it very, very clandestine and very quiet. Something that simply wasn't discussed. Although my dad said that when he was a teenager and they lived on a big piece of property and he had chores to do, they basically was real agricultural. And he came in one Thursday afternoon and the parlor was off limits because that's where the girls were playing bridge. Well, my dad was listening through the French doors. They weren't playing bridge. His mother, his sister Marjorie, and his grandmother Grace, they were doing readings for ladies in the town. And but all the women told their husbands, oh, we're playing bridge, but they weren't. And then after that, my dad said, well, I heard what was going on, and then he opened up to them that I hear and see spirits.
Wow.
And so when these abilities emerged with me, it was sort of a yay boo kind of a thing.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason my dad was concerned, and so I'm 3.5, and I'm seeing spirits. And by the time I was 5, I was starting Catholic school.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember my dad sat me down and he said, don't talk to anyone about this except your mother and me. And he goes, people who see things others don't, they'll get taken away. And that really scared me. And I could see, I was terrified. My mom says to my dad, Earl, that was his name. She goes, stop scaring him. And he could see I was really shaken up. And I remember he hugged me and he says, Mark, I just don't want anyone to hurt you. Well, what I found out, Faust, is that about 20 years before I was born, his sister Marjorie, a very gifted medium, she was married to this religious extremist, unfortunately for her. And he was afraid of her abilities. He thought it was evil because a lot of religious people, they yanked, certain scriptural passages. But if they read the entire document, they would see that there's many passages that look at these abilities as a blessing. But he was going to work one day. He worked at a machine shop at a steel plant in Pennsylvania And Marjorie begged him not to go to work because she had a terrible feeling something horrible was going to happen to him. And she started crying, and they got into a big fight. She goes, "I'm feeling it in my stomach." And he said, "Fine, fine, I'll stay home." Well, that day, Faust, a crane was lifting thousands of pounds of steel beams, and all of a sudden the cable snapped, and they fell, and it crushed the machine shop that he worked in and killed everybody
Wow.
in it. Yeah, so if he'd been there, well, instead of being grateful, this just intensified his paranoia. He actually got an unscrupulous psychiatrist to diagnose Marjorie as a paranoid, delusional schizophrenic, and she was forcibly removed from her home and, against her will, subjected to electroshock therapy for
Oh my
over
God.
6 months in a mental institution. Basically, they back in those days when they did electroshock, the voltage was so high it damaged her brain to the point she never spoke about seeing spirits again. And so here I am at 5 years of age, and my dad was afraid
Uh,
something like that could happen to me. So as I got older, I understood why my dad didn't want to talk about it. Mom would be like, "Hey, let me teach you how to see auras," but
yeah.
dad was afraid of it, and for good reason. So growing up in this environment with parents who could see spirits, I mean, when as and I thought when I started Catholic school, like, oh, this will be cool because there's angels and saints and all these, demons and, all these supernatural
Yeah.
entities they're all telling us about. But then when I got into the school, I started seeing that, yeah, let's not talk about this.
No.
Okay. Because,
No.
it's funny how religion, only God only talked to people 2,000 years ago, then closed the book
Right.
on us. People only saw miracles 2,000 years ago. And that certainly isn't the case. So that is a snapshot
Mm.
of what my early childhood was like.
Wow. We have a lot in common. So I'm of Italian American descent. My
Woo!
my and my father's family, but also Sicilian Italian, moved to the northeastern part of Pennsylvania. My mother's family moved to a little small village about an hour outside New York City called Roseto. Um, Crazy. This, I think Roseto is in like Wikipedia because of, they did a study, and they figured that all these old Italians were living to be like 90 and 100 because of all the wine they
I
drank.
read that study. Yeah. And they said it was because of the sense of community, the
Yeah.
caring, the love. Because at first they thought, well, maybe it's their food. And the
Hmm.
Mediterranean diet certainly is considered very healthful. But a lot of times Italians eat a lot of pork because of the sausage. Now, I don't, okay, just
Hmm.
because it just doesn't agree with me. But the Mediterranean diet, but the indication of the report was when people feel loved and they're
Hmm.
happy, they tend to live longer.
Yeah, absolutely. And ironically, that's the part of Pennsylvania my mother's family moved to, um, and and just so similar areas there. But
Yeah.
that must have been just astounding, but also slightly traumatic for you as a boy. And I can't even imagine, your dad. We live in such a material world.
Yes.
Even today, people who have these premonitions and come forward, they end up being prosecuted because we don't live in a society that, I mean, for the most part, believes that this is like, that person could have had knowledge. The only way they could have had knowledge is if they were in on it somehow. You know what I'm saying? So
Right.
there's like this great suspicion that occurs, and that's in part due to this misunderstanding that we have as a society about reality, about what we're doing here, what we're made out of, and things of that nature. But wow, so that must have been, I can't imagine, what kind of conflict. And I understand Catholic school too, because I went for my entire life as I was an altar boy, and I had a twin brother, so they used to make us serve as, we were bookends. Every holiday, every special mass, they had me and my twin brother on each end of the priest. It was no fun, but yeah. So we have that in common as well.
Yeah, childhood it's great being a kid, but it's also very difficult. And I'm very thankful that I had the parents that I had, because so many of my colleagues who are mediums explain the abuses that they went through.
Mm.
Like, what my Aunt Marjorie had to endure, because, you're different. I mean, it's hard enough being a kid, but when you're a different kid, but
Yeah.
my dad, being a Navy SEAL, was like, well, suck it up, deal with it, and he taught me how to deal with it. And he said that, what other people think of you is their business. It's not yours. Don't let it bother you. Because, and I'm sure you realize this, and have experienced this, when you put yourself out there like you do and I do,
Mm.
not everybody is going to welcome what we're saying. Not everybody's going to agree with it. And in the age of social media, that gives a lot of cowards and
Mm-hmm.
weak people with low self-confidence the ability to be bullies, because they can write things and say things that they would never have the courage to say to your face. And that's one of the downsides of social media. One of the upsides of it is that it has created an interconnectedness globally, where we
Mm-hmm.
can do programs like this and we can interface and interact with people. But these abilities are real things. And unfortunately, there's a lot of unscrupulous people out there. I see this also on social media, people that will direct message or impersonate me
Yeah.
or other mediums and say, "Oh, I have a feeling about you. Contact me," and they're trying to get money out of you. A legitimate medium doesn't direct message somebody and say, "I have a feeling about you." That's unethical. That's inappropriate. What
Yeah.
they're saying is, I have a feeling you're a sucker, and if you give me money,
Yeah.
I'll take it from you. But that's unfortunate that there are people that do those things. And but when we begin to study these abilities through the scientific method, which is what I do,
Mm-hmm.
and I've been studied, we're seeing that this isn't magic, this isn't hocus pocus, that there is an explanation for everything, and it's going to be based in science. Whether or not we have the technology at this point in time to quantify it, we're headed definitely in that direction.
I agree wholeheartedly, and science is catching up to what a lot of people have come to know and experience intuitively for a long, long time. And I love that. It can't catch up fast enough for our society and for where we're at right now. From my opinion, where I'm sitting, I think it's going to be the thing that saves us, if anything can. This the truth about who we are, what we are, and how we're so connected to each other. I think that will be the gateway to much greater truths. And so I'm with you, my friend, and I'm loving that part of being alive today very much. Just how much science is like, wait a minute, there is a biofield that connects us. There all these things like, well, really,
Yes.
well, we've been saying that, and the materialists have been calling it pseudoscience and condemning people who do this, and of course, it doesn't help that there are a lot of, I've been in the presence of mediums before, and I've also been in the presence of some people who are questionable about what
No,
they're
bet.
doing, and there's a big
Yeah.
difference. you
Yeah,
know
there is.
um uh, and unfortunately those people, and then they get outed, and then of course in our very polarized human way, we say, well, see, I told you, they're all fake. It's like, wait a minute, just because Joey was, not sincere and scamming people, doesn't mean that this is not a real phenomenon. Doesn't happen. But again, that's a
Exactly. And I think we know who we're talking about.
yeah.
Um, and it is unfortunate, because there's always been charlatanism. There's always been exploitative
Hmm.
people, predators who will take advantage of people to tell them what they want to hear. And when I was studying with some British mediums, there was one of them. He was so funny. Um, he comes in and he was teaching the class. And he goes, "All right, we're going to avoid the 4 assumed dialogues. Number 1, spirits are with you. Number 2, they bring you love. 3, they bring you joy. 4, they want you to feel uplifted." Said, yes, these are important, but it's not evidential. And then he looks at me because I was the only American in the crowd, and he goes, "Oh, and you Americans, when all else fails, do pull out a Native American spirit. Well, there'll be no Hiawatha or Pocahontas in this class." And in Faust, I mean, I was trying not to laugh because it's like, this is like some weird Harry Potter Professor
Yeah.
Snape thing going on here. But he had a very important point, because I've seen mediums. There's this one guy, and I won't name him, but every woman in a prior life used to be a nun, and every man used to be an Indian chief. And I'm thinking, well, couldn't somebody possibly have been a Central Asian Cossack? Couldn't
Right.
somebody be from, equatorial Africa? I mean, it gets so ridiculous. And also, that's not mediumship when you're doing a reading, supposedly connecting with somebody's spirits, and you start telling them what their past lives were.
Yeah,
and yes, there are people who do past life regressions, but that's
right.
not evidential if you throw out that, oh, you were Joan of Arc, that's why you're afraid of lighters. You know what I'm saying? It's like, come on.
That should be a key indicator right there,
Exactly. And people are like, oh, he told me I was Joan of Arc. And it was funny because in the lectures I do on reincarnation, in Egypt, there was a woman who went by the name of Ohm Setty. And she was born around 1904 in England. Her name was Louise Eddy. And she suffered some type of injury when she was about 4 or 5. And then after that, Faust, she started talking about her life in ancient Egypt. And it was very, very detailed. And like a good Edwardian family, her parents considered her insane and had her shipped off to an institution. But eventually she got away from that. And when she was 18 years old, and I'm not sure how she got the funds, but she got on a ship and went to Egypt. And she started working at the Giza Plateau with the archaeologists there. And they were astounded because within a few months, she learned not only how to read Egyptian hieroglyphics, but how to speak it. And it takes PhDs years to figure that out. But she said that the Giza Plateau didn't resonate with her, so she sailed farther south down the Nile River to Abydos, and then she went to the temple of Seti the Great. And when she was working with the archaeologists there, she said, well, there used to be an irrigation system over there, and there used to be an orchard over there. And she started telling them, they're like, Well, then all of a sudden, the excavation indicated right where she said there was an irrigation system, there was. And then right where she said there was an orchard, they found this. And she explained to them that she was a courtesan in the court of Seti the Great. And her detail, her knowledge, and even the local Egyptians used to venerate her as kind of a holy woman. Because in Islam, there's schools of thought in Islam, the doctrine of Ma'an, of returning, which is in progressive Islam, embraces reincarnation, but mainstream Islam doesn't. But people looked at Ohm Setty as this mystical figure. I was very privileged to see an interview with her from the 1980s. I believe she died in 1988, 89. And they were talking to her about reincarnation. And she was given this incredibly detailed information about the court of Seti and what they did and all this. And she said, oh, yes, everyone comes to Egypt in search of their prior incarnation. She said, you have no idea how many Cleopatras I've met.
I'm sure. Wow. What a story. I was just doing a video about Pope Vigilius and Emperor what was his name? Justinian, and how Justinian was, very much like sat down with some of Pope Vigilius's people, and they were like, listen, this whole reincarnation thing that's going on, it's not going to help us. Okay. we this has to be a very, very unique and special thing. If it's just if people are just believing that, well, they're going to be reborn either way, why are they going to do what we tell them to do? Why are they going to pay
Exactly.
taxes? You know, why
Yeah,
are they going to feel like they need to talk to us to talk to God?
yeah, that
And
was the fifth ecumenical council in
that's right.
Constantinople, which is modern day Istanbul. And Justinian was the last great emperor, if you will, of the Roman Empire, because by the time he came along, the western half had fallen. And so he
Mm,
tried to reconquer it. And from his reign onwards, the Eastern Empire became known as the Byzantine Empire. And it
mhm.
took on a much more Greek character because they were all Greek speaking. And prior to that, there was a debate within Christian circles. They didn't call it the Catholic Church, and it was the
Right.
Christian Church, whether or not reincarnation existed. And there's a couple passages that survived the edits. People talk about the Bible is
Yeah.
the one true word of God. It's like, well, which version of it? Because
Yeah.
by
It's
the
a
time
copy of a copy of a
Justinian came
copy.
along, yeah, and Justinian came along 500 years after Jesus, and the Fifth Ecumenical Council meant by that time there were at least 5 revisions, major revisions. And in the early centuries, around 180 AD to around 200 AD, Origen,
That's right.
Origen of Alexandria, was a great Christian theologian, and he embraced the doctrine of reincarnation and said that we all live a succession of lifetimes until
Mhm,
we are able to ascend to the God plane. And he said even Satan, even Lucifer, will eventually emerge from the pit.
mhm.
And then came Emperor Constantine. And when I went to Catholic school, Constantine is Saint Constantine. But
Right.
when I started studying what he was really like, there was not anything very
Saintly,
saintly about
no.
him. No, he was a general and he annihilated his competition and basically
He had the
executed.
Pope beat up, for God's
He had the
sakes.
Pope beat up and most of his family executed for treason.
Right.
But he wasn't Christian until his deathbed. That's when he took his vows. But he realized that the empire was mostly Christian by that time,
Mm.
so he ordered the Council of Nicaea, and he ordered all the bishops within the empire to come up with an authoritative text for the Bible, and that's where the first version of it comes along. And
Mm.
what's really fascinating is there is an alternate version of Genesis, which somehow ended up in the Quran, which
Wow.
I think is really fascinating. But I mean, we could speak all day about this.
Right.
But reincarnation was kind of then looked at as sort of a fringe element, and exactly what you said, Faust. By the time Virgilius, the Pope Virgilius,
Hmm.
and Justinian the Great came along, it's like um, the religion needs to be an extension of imperial authority. And
Yes.
since the emperor is the equal of the apostles and God's vice regent on earth, if you disobey the emperor, you're disobeying God, and therefore you go to an eternal pit of fire and brimstone and burn forever. And it was used then to scare people because
Fear mongering. Yeah.
reincarnation gives us a chance to perfect
That's
our
right.
soul, or however it
Evolve
works, evolve. And but there's a couple passages in the Bible which apparently were missed, one of which was the transfiguration. Now the
mm.
transfiguration is really cool because Jesus takes a select group of apostles to the top of a mountain, and all of a sudden he begins to glow white, and a mist forms around him, and the spirits of Elijah and Moses appear on either side of him. Elijah or Moses was the bringer of the law. Elijah was the enforcer of the law. Jesus is the embodiment of the law of God, according to theological analysis. And after this episode, and of course, understandably, the apostles are freaked out when
Mm.
they see this. And the question is, well, who are you? And Jesus says, well, who do you think I am? And the response, it's in I think it's in three different of the Gospels. Some say that you are the prophet Elijah. Others say that you are John the Baptist who has returned. Okay, John the Baptist was Jesus's first cousin.
That's right.
And John the Baptist was executed by order of Herod Antipas,
That's
who
right.
was Herod the Great, who murdered all the babies, and this all. I talk about a lot of this in the Afterlife Frequency, but John had been recently executed, but Elijah lived 800 years before that.
Mm-hmm.
And what Jesus said was Elijah has returned, but they did not recognize him. And then it says, the scripture says, they knew then he was referring to John the Baptist. So what Jesus said was John was the reincarnation of Elijah.
Mm.
Whoa. That's pretty heavy duty. And this passage has been very heavily studied, not only by progressive Christian scholars, but by Hindus and Buddhists, because it appears that this may have been one of the references to reincarnation, which survived the edits of the Fifth Ecumenical Council.
Slipped in there.
It slipped. And I know that there's a lot of probably fundamentalists who may hear this are going to get, up in arms about it, but this isn't heresy. This is history. Mm-hmm. And I'm not telling you that this is what it is. I'm saying, look at it, look at what the scholars are writing about it, and then decide for yourself. I mean, if you want to believe in reincarnation, believe in it. If you don't, that's the beauty, theoretically, of living in the United States, is that we have freedom of religion, and may I add, freedom from religion.
That's right. And God willing, we keep those wonderful liberties. But people get very much up in arms and defensive about their beliefs, and it's funny because I did a little video about this altercation between Pope, because it's an awesome little piece of history that had a tremendous effect on the earth as we know it, in societies as we know it. Even though it was a little incident behind closed doors, and I know there's more to it than just the emperor and the Pope getting kind of into this altercation wrestling match. But people comment and they're just like, yo, you better have some serious evidence to back this up, because this is against everything I believe. And I was like, wait a minute. I was like, how does it go against everything you believe? I was like, if you didn't believe that this was your only life, would it change the way you live? Because that's a question you should ask yourself anyway. And then maybe begin to look at things outside of your faith. Like look at what Jesus did in his life, outside of what the Bible and the Catholic Church tells you he did, because he was all over the place according to a lot of people. So it would have made sense to me that he learned and studied these things.
Jesus was quite the revolutionary in a very peaceful way, because he shook up the religious hierarchy of Judea and Israel. And so when people then begin to study his teachings and different interpretations, because that shakes up their religious mindset, then once again it's met with resistance. It's funny because I remember when I was studying Hinduism and I was speaking to some of my colleagues, and I said, well, what do you think about Jesus? They said Jesus was an avatar. He was Krishna, he was Buddha, he was Jesus. Mm-hmm. They said that he's a great avatar that comes along. And I love what the Hindus tell me. That there's many things that they say that I agree with. They say that in the West, you Christians question the existence of God and think that God is this distant entity. Whereas in Hinduism, we believe that you should try to see God, and that you should be kind to everyone that you meet, because it could be God in human form. And so their thought is that God will take human form, and how you interact with those people, or how you treat people. Now, didn't Jesus tell us, as did Buddha, treat other people the way you wish to be treated?
Yeah.
So there is this universal be nice message which flows through all of the great belief systems.
Yes.
The belief systems don't tell you, Hinduism, Buddhism, Christianity, their purest forms don't tell you to go out and kill people and persecute
That's
and
right.
yeah, they don't, and
Their
judge.
core, they have a core
So
message that thankfully survives. It's the only saving grace of many of, in my opinion, of these religions, because they've become such structures of governance and power. Well, they, at least they were for many centuries. Now that's
yes,
shifting, but um, yeah, but the core message, do unto others as you would have done unto you, and what you do unto the least to me, you do unto me. Those messages
ex-
thankfully survive, and that's the core, of many religions.
well,
I
going
yeah,
back, yeah, and
go
going
ahead.
back to the transfiguration. Now, people that are spiritualists, all right, so all of a sudden Moses and Elijah appear on either side of Jesus. This would be what is known as physical mediumship. And true physical mediums, ectoplasm, which is a white, smoky looking material, can take the form or appear as the image of the spirit communicating. Does this mean that Jesus was a highly advanced physical medium? And I know when you say that, a lot of people get all bent out of shape about it,
Not me.
but yeah, I mean, you don't.
Yeah.
And then there are schools of thought that the resurrection may not have been corporeal, but actually another example of physical mediumship. And the reason that some people believe that is because when it was Mary Magdalene and then two of the apostles encountered Jesus on the road to Emmaus, they didn't recognize him.
That's
And why
right.
didn't they recognize him? I mean, he was crucified, a couple days earlier, and the thought is because the ectoplasm had not quite organized and
Mm.
solidified yet, because it took a while, then all of a sudden they recognized him. Now, I am not saying that this is what happened. I'm saying that there are people who are examining this and saying this is a possible alternative. And it certainly makes for great discussions on with you, Faust, when we
Absolutely.
can talk about these things. But it all comes down to there are things in this world that far exceed the perception of our five physical senses of sight, hearing, taste, smell, and touch. And like you indicated earlier, our technology is finally beginning to catch up with this.
Absolutely. And I love the term that you use, the electromagnetic soul, and the way that you speak about it in your book. I I was I was brought to tears reading the beginning of your book, because I was reading about that story of the family that came to you, and they were telling you about, it was this brother and a sister, and they're telling you about their mother, who had
Yeah,
very bad Alzheimer's, and was
yeah,
very much long time in kind of a decline, and then ended up in a care home, and so it came to the end, and she was on a feeding tube,
yeah.
and she had a
A
terminal
deathbed vision,
a
terminal
deathbed a
lucidity, and a deathbed
terminal
vision.
lucidity,
Yes.
because I recently, well, it was January that I lost my older brother, and he was,
I'm sorry.
thank you, thank you, and I he had health problems, but he was fine for many years, and then things took a decline, and but he had a lot of things wrong with him, but when he was not in pain, or he was a happy-go-lucky guy. I mean, he walked into a room and he just lit it up. He had physical handicaps because he was premature. He was a premature baby, and also he had like a rare blood um, genetic thing that he got from my parents that caused his blood to act like a sickle cell anemic when he would go into a crisis, which was exasperated by his physical condition. Anyway, um, it's not as extreme as a sickle cell anemic, but it shows characteristics of that, and so things took a decline, and he ended up in the hospital. His blood count started dropping, for months, and then and they couldn't. Usually, they would give him a transfusion, and you know that would stabilize him. But the transfusions were stabilizing him, you know, less and less time, and so things started to get a little crazy. And his like he was always there mentally. He had never checked out. And when I talked to him, and he couldn't really talk to me. It was very, very scary, and that went on for you know a month where he was just completely out of it.
Yeah.
And then when I you know when I went and saw him, he right as I was leaving, he came to, and he looked me in the eye, and he said my name, and then he tried to he tried to tell me that he was having trouble talking to me, you know, and I was like, just
Yes.
rest, you know. But he said my name, and he gave me a big hug, and then you know he sat up. I mean, he hadn't done this in weeks, and he was lucid, and he looked at my parents, and he said, I just want to go home. He said, I'm ready to go home, you
Yeah.
know. And you know, I heard that for what it was. My parents heard it for what they hoped it meant, you know, and they were reinvigorated, and he ended up lasting about another week, but he never had another moment like that, right up until, and I wasn't there for this, but I'm told, you know, when they pulled his tube out, because he was, they tried giving him blood, you know, after that moment, um they thought, okay, you know, he's trying to make a comeback, you know, let's give him what he needs. And but his body was falling apart, and so was starting to bleed out of, everywhere,
What?
you know. It was,
I don't mean to interrupt, but what was him? Did he have some sensitivity to peanuts?
I don't I don't think so. No, I don't think so.
Okay, because what's with peanuts? With you or peanuts?
I mean, I love peanuts. I love peanut butter in general.
Okay. Okay.
Um,
All right.
yeah,
Yeah. 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 All right. Go on. Go on.
but but right. So you know, it got it. He never had another moment like that. And then, you know, when he started bleeding out of, when they were like, he was coughing up blood, and it was coming out the bottom and the top, and you know,
Oh,
they were like, it's just a matter of time. Do you want us to take the tube out? And so when they took the tube, you know, they said, okay, you know, they took the tube out. He sat up, and he took my parents, and he gave them a hug, and he told them he loved them, and he said, I'm gonna go home. And finally they understood what he meant, and then, you know, he passed on. But he was completely out of it, except for those two moments when he
yeah.
told us that he was ready to go home, which, you know, just amazing. You know, he had no energy at all, and then bam, you know, he just to let them know, because they didn't get it the first time. He wanted to let them know that he was going home. Just amazing, you know. And you make this wonderful comparison in your book. You know, you're like, a light bulb right before it burns out, you see
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
burst, right?
If I could, yeah.
Please.
Let me explain. Um, what you described is what's known as terminal lucidity, and there could have been also a deathbed vision in there. And a deathbed vision is where people who are on the threshold of leaving this world and crossing to the other side may encounter deceased loved ones, or do, and they'll talk about them. But I've seen in so many instances, people always say, I want to go home. And initially it's like, well, does he want to be taken home to die there? No, what they're talking about is reverting to our pure energetic state, the other side, as in that's home. And I developed the electromagnetic soul theory after years of research. And in fields of faith, we call our soul, or we call it a soul or a spirit. In science, we refer to it as consciousness. It's the who and what we are. And every great spiritual teacher from ancient India through Zoroaster, Moses, Buddha, Jesus, Muhammad, Confucius, Lao Tzu, I mean, all the way up to modern day, the religions of Africa and the Pacific describe how the soul, the who and what we are, pre-exists the body, comes into the body, moves on after the body dies. And we know from the law of thermodynamics that energy is neither created nor destroyed, only transferred from one form to another. We also know from the neurobiology, neuroscience, that the brain has an electromagnetic field. And it's only 2% of the body's weight, but it uses 20% of the body's energy. So there's a lot going on there. And so everything is made of molecules. We know this from science, which in turn are made of atoms, which in turn are made of electrons, protons, and neutrons, which in turn are made of a smaller particle of electromagnetic energy known as a quantum. And for all of our science fans, an electron is a quantum because it's 1/1800th the size of a proton. All right, so we covered that. But what that means, Faust, and I know that you understand this, but for the benefit of the listeners, everything on the subatomic level is made of the same electromagnetic energy. And that means you and me, our bodies, the microphones we're speaking into, the radio waves that the show is being broadcast, that's electromagnetic energy, the light from the sun, the surface of Mars, and beyond are all electromagnetic energy. So I developed the term the electromagnetic soul to explain what we really are, which is pure consciousness that is eternal electromagnetic energy. And the brain, and this is a big debate in the medical field and in afterlife research, is did the brain create consciousness? No, it did not. The brain is a highly complex organ, but it hosts the consciousness the same way your computer hard drive hosts Windows 11 and the programs on it. In other words, your computer did not create those programs, it only hosts it. And so when the computer hard drive crashes, meaning your brain, when you physically die, the spirit is then released from that. Now, what is going on with people who are in declining conditions? The term terminal lucidity has been used to describe a situation just like your brother. Here he was, essentially non-responsive, and near his physical death, he's able to regain lucidity and communicate. We've seen this in people that have severe brain damage, where the brain itself is heavily damaged, in people with dementia, with Alzheimer's, with schizophrenia, brain cancer. And the thing is, there's no one common physical denominator. Right. If it just appeared with people with Alzheimer's, maybe they could figure that out. But the one thing all neuroscientists agree, Faust, is that at the moment of death, your brain doesn't suddenly grow 1 billion new neurons.
No, that's right.
And so what I believe is, all right, take an incandescent light bulb, and we've all seen an incandescent light bulb right before it burns out. It gets real bright, boom, and then pops. Mm-hmm. Well, the light bulb did not create the electricity flowing through it. And the filament inside of it, which contains tungsten, that's what regulates the flow of electricity. So when the bulb is functioning properly, the tungsten and the filament can handle the flow of electricity. But as the tungsten degrades, it can no longer handle that same amount of electricity. And so there is an energetic surge before it goes out. It's the same thing what happens. This is my theory with the human brain. As the brain, which has neurons and it's a very sophisticated electrical system running all this electricity through it, as it degrades, it is no longer able to regulate the same amount of energy that a healthy brain would. So at the moment of passing, there is an energetic surge, just like what happens to a light bulb. And that, I believe, is indication that my electromagnetic soul theory is correct, because the brain's no longer functioning, but the who and what we are, the soul, does. And that's why the person is able to communicate. Now, there have been two recent discoveries which underscore my electromagnetic soul theory. One occurred in 22222. That's how I remember it. 22222 in Tartu, Estonia. And a man in his late 80s had a stroke, and he was rushed to the hospital. And the doctors there put EEG on him, electroencephalogram, to measure his brainwave frequencies. There's 5 main brainwave frequencies. There's gamma, and that's where you're like on Final Jeopardy. Okay, you're like brains cranking.
Right.
Then there's beta, the normal awake state. Then there is alpha, that's the relaxed, daydreamy, drifting off. Theta, deep, dreamful sleep. And then delta, very little brain activity, but that's where your body heals. Okay, 5 brainwave frequencies. They're measuring these. All of a sudden, he has a massive coronary, massive heart attack, and dies. This is the first time in history somebody was being administered an EEG at the time of death, and all 5 brainwave frequencies surged off the scale.
Wow.
The medical community worldwide flabbergasted. Not what they expected. They figured it'd be some fizzling out. And it is believed, and several of the doctors wrote, this may be evidence of a near-death experience. Well, in November of 2022, a study that was conducted by the Grossman Center at New York University was released of over 500 people at 120, I think, 7 different hospitals in the US and the UK. It was a study done where people who are being given cardiopulmonary resuscitation, in other words, they're going into heart failure, and the subjects were administered an EEG. But these people, they were resuscitated.
Wow.
Every single one of them, when their heart stopped, when they physically, technically died, all 5 brainwave frequencies surged off the scale.
Wow.
20% of those people came back from when they were revived with a near-death experience of leaving their body, encountering deceased loved ones, going into the light. And so now we're beginning to have empirical evidence that when we die, it's not just somebody flips off a switch. Oh, no, the physical body, the brain, which is part of the body, may die, but the energy, the electromagnetic soul, because what is an EEG, an electroencephalogram measure, is electromagnetic energy. And now we're beginning to see this. In fact, Sam Parnia, who's the head of the study, said that it appears that consciousness survives physical death based on the people who came back with accounts of more than just going into the light. A lot of them talked about their consciousness traveled down the hall in the hospital, saw what people were saying. So we're living in very exciting times when it comes to survival of consciousness and afterlife science.
Absolutely. You know, it makes me think of Anita Moorjani and Bruce Lipton, and you know, the Anita Moorjani story is incredible. You know, she was, of course, her consciousness was both in the room with her body and then in the doctor's room with her parents and her husband, getting the talk and preparing them for, you know, what they believed was inevitable. She was in a coma for a long time, and and she could hear the conversations. He could, you know, she was, consciousnness, of course, is no longer confined to you know what we experience it as in a body, which is amazing. And you know, I have a lot of questions about, you know, I understand that part of it, because I've heard so many people talk about it, and I just kind of come into an intuitive understanding about it, about just, you know, consciousness is limited when you're in a body, but the moment we're out of that body, I think it naturally expands into a greater version of itself. But, you know, my question, for one of the questions I was like, I can't wait to ask Mark this, you know, what happens when, like, so my brother, he was mostly deaf, not totally deaf. He had hearing aids. You know, he got pretty good at talking. His speech was affected, you know, and if you like me, if you knew him, you could understand what he was saying. It was just, some people had more trouble.
Right. Yeah. You
Um,
learned how. Yeah.
yeah, but there was a lot of learning different difficulties from being so hard of hearing, and you know, he got by with school and he had a good time. But if I think my twin brother tried to get him to do to try to get, because he was trying to talk to girls, but his writing was, his grammar was not very good. And my brother was like trying to get him. He's like, if you want to talk to girls online, then you gotta write better. And he was giving him grammar tests, and my brother Chris was paying one of my friends to do it for him. We found out, but and laughing about it. I was like,
Sorry,
we were like,
ladies.
but that tells you a lot about him. But my question is like, so in the afterlife, obviously he's not confined to that
Not at all.
experience that
No, not at
so
all.
he wouldn't, I just, it's hard for me to imagine my brother any way that then I
Well, let
knew
me
him,
explain,
but
if I
please.
may. I was doing a reading, and I've done close to 15,000, possibly more readings, and multiple spirits come through. So I've communicated with a lot of spirits. And I was doing a reading for an older gentleman, and a male came in, male energy. And at first, the spirit appeared, and he was wearing these wrist and braces and walking on crutches. And then all of a sudden, in the vision that the spirit was transmitting to me, he stood up, he threw the braces aside, and he started dancing, and he was speaking clearly. And the older gentleman burst into tears and said, "That's my brother. He had cerebral palsy. He could barely speak, and now I know he's free of that."
Wow.
So we have to realize that we associate the spiritual with the physical, and that's not the case. And the brain hosts the electromagnetic soul. And when the EMS leaves the body, it's pure energy. Energy doesn't get sick, old, tired, or die. So when a spirit connects with me initially, they usually will appear the way they did prior to passing. Because let's say your 95-year-old grandmother who died comes through looking like a 22-year-old,
Right.
really foxy looking young lady. We tend to think of our grandparents as always old people, but they were young once. All right. But for the purpose of identifying them, your brother would come through and he would indicate that he had hearing issues and how he passed. But then after that initial identification, they will then morph into these pure, healthy versions of themselves. Now, this correlates in near-death experiences when people who leave their bodies and they go through the tunnel into the light and they encounter deceased loved ones. They initially recognize them, but they say everybody there looked like they were in their 20s and 30s. Now, why is that? Because once again, they're pure energy, and they don't necessarily have a body in the sense that we do, but they're projecting a point of reference that you can understand. So your brother would come through and say, yes, I had these problems, but now that I'm a spirit, like yesterday, I did a reading for a woman, and her son came through and he described what was going on in his brain, and it was dark and terrifying, and he took his own life. But what he explained to us is that he could no longer control. I go, there was something he couldn't control, and it was, and she said, well, he was a schizophrenic, and it was overwhelming him. Okay, and I didn't know any of this before that. And what he explained to her is, I'm free of that. I'm free of that. And so with your brother, that is the same case. He would identify himself, because if everybody comes in playing harps and the Michelangelo painting, well, it's like yeah, anybody could make that stuff up. And that's the point of evidential mediumship, is to present facts and evidence to identify the spirit, to guarantee the authenticity of the contact, and then move to the next phase where they start giving deeper messages about you, about them, about what is important for you to understand.
Yeah,
I hope that answers your question.
Yes, it does. And I've also been in the presence of mediums who, and it's, I mean, you know, some stuff, it's just, you just can't make it up. It's so specific. It's so synchronistic and unique, you know, that they're pulling from, you know, and I'm recalling this one time, this medium was something that came through about an animal, and I think it was a horse, or it might have even been a more exotic animal, but it was crazy. It was like an elephant, and I'm like, what is this? What? Well, like this is going nowhere fast. Who has elephants? You know, but sure enough, like there was a person in the audience. There was a
Somebody
big
that took
audience,
care of an elephant.
you
Yeah.
know, that took
Yeah.
care of these elephants for this circus in Europe, and I was like, oh my god. Crazy specific things that you know,
Well,
even if
I had
yeah.
a situation where I was doing a reading for this woman, and her mother's spirit came through, and the mom's spirit began to talk to me about a 7-year-old boy that was very close to her, who's still here in this world. And she goes, well, I don't have any children, but my sister has a 7-year-old son, and I'm very close to him and to my sister. I said, well, there's something going on with the boy's eyes, and you need to get him into the eye doctor. And she said, that's weird, because I was talking to my sister yesterday, and she said he's been getting headaches and complaining about it's hard to see his homework. And I said, well, now your mother is giving me the song Tutti Frutti, Ah Rudy by Little Richard. So I start singing Tutti Frutti, Ah Rudy. And I go, does that make any sense? She goes, no. She goes, I know who Little Richard was, but, you know, I'm not a fan, and that song has no relevance. I said, well, that's the message. So 2 weeks later, she contacted me, and she goes, Mark, you're not going to believe this. And I love when people tell me that, because it's like, yeah, I'm going to believe it. She said, I called my sister, told her about all this, and my sister said, well, let's get him to the eye doctor. So she said the three of us, my nephew, my sister, and we took him to the eye doctor. And the second we walked into the office, on the radio, it started playing Tutti Frutti, Ah Rudy by Little Richard.
Wow.
Now, when people say you're cold reading, it's a really, I think we're past 1 billion to 1 on the odds of that happening.
Yeah.
But here's what was happening. First off, spirits being electromagnetic souls. When we leave the material world, think of your EMS as a drop of water, and it plunges into the eternal sea of souls that I call the collective consciousness. You're still an individual, but now you're energetically linked with all these spirits. You have this vast energy knowledge. Okay? So that's why they can run a scan on somebody and say, like when I was talking about peanuts before, your brother was letting me know that you like peanuts, okay? And there's somebody close to you or him that's having some type of issue with the kidney right now. So anyway, then the mom's spirit did a scan of her grandson, saw that he was having issues with his eyes because they pick up on the electromagnetic anomaly there. To let everybody know that they were in the right place and the right time on the quantum subatomic level. According to Einstein's theory of relativity, time does not exist, which is why spirits can perceive what we call the future. So she let us know what song was going to be playing, and radio waves are also an electromagnetic energy. So therefore, they walked into the doctor's office, here, Tutti Frutti, Ah Rudy, they're in the right place, right time, doing the right thing.
Right. It's like that, a wink from the universe. It's an incredible synchronicity.
It is, and it's just such an honor to be able to help people in this capacity. And you know,
Yeah.
I look at myself not as the gift, but as the custodian of this ability. And because I've encountered some mediums that get very full of themselves, and they get into the whole celebrity of it and all that. And you know, that's fine. That may be their mission. And you know, we're out in the public eye and all that.
Yeah.
But and so you have to carry yourself with a form of self-confidence. But the thing is, this is an ability which is here to help people. It is not negative or evil, or you know how people
Right.
tend to fear what they don't understand. If they don't understand it, they fear it. Therefore, they make it evil. But the truth is, these abilities have been documented for thousands of years, and now we're beginning to see they're possible because of our physiology and our interface with the electromagnetic quantum fields that are around us.
Yes. And we're wired for them in many ways. We have the right antenna, and you you talk about the psychic gland. I learned to meditate under the tutelage of Dr. Joe Dispenza, and he, of course, I don't know if you ever heard his work or heard him speak, but he
Yeah,
talks about,
he's a good guy. Yeah.
great guy, and he talks about the pineal gland, of course, and you don't have to delve too far into this subjects to learn how important that gland can be, and I think that
Yes.
we are all in many ways wired for some reception, and I think people some people are have a greater capacity for it, and of course if those people pursue that capacity, just like Beethoven, just like Da Vinci, you can become
Sure.
truly excellent at something. It doesn't matter what
Well,
the craft or
we're
skill
all
is.
good. We're all good at doing different things.
Hmm.
I mean, if everybody was the same, we'd be like a school of fish.
Yeah.
We'd be reacting to everything, light and temperature and everything the same, but we're not. And that's one of the beautiful gifts that we've been given is our individuality. And then we've all been given a skill set, and what we do with that skill set and in the choices that we make now, that's where free will comes in. I mean,
Hmm.
I don't want to get political, but let's say somebody like Vladimir Putin. Okay, he has a tremendous skill set. He is a leader. He's a highly controlling, intelligent, manipulative personality, but that could have been turned to humanitarian purposes
Right.
instead of indulging in ego. And that was his choice
That's right.
with the skill set he was given. And we see this with many people. I mean, like you said, Leonardo da Vinci. Well, he put his skill set to create some incredible works of art.
Hmm.
Michelangelo. I just wrote an article. I write for Best Holistic Life magazine, and the September article that I just completed, September 8th, 1504, is when Michelangelo completed his statue of David.
Mm.
And it was sheer genius, all of the factors that went into that and the complications. And here we are 500 years later, and there's
Yeah.
people who think that it's somehow pornography. um, and the what I wrote about is there's more to the statue of David than what meets the naked eye. And I explained the scriptural references and why Michelangelo depicted him as being naked as facing Goliath, because here he
Hmm.
is, a teenager, facing this big bad dude who was probably 6'4", 6'5",
Hmm.
a hardened soldier who wanted to kill him, completely vulnerable, completely exposed.
Yeah.
The iconic look on David's face is the precise moment a boy becomes a man.
Mm.
And so they wheel this statue out in the middle of Renaissance Florence, and
My
boom,
God.
there's this 17 plus foot naked guy. And at first everyone's like, oh my God. And of course the Inquisition was
My
there,
God.
an extension of the Catholic Church. He used to burn people alive for immorality. But then Michelangelo explained to them, and he cited the scriptural references of why he did what he did. And all of a sudden, a little education goes a very long way. It
Mm.
wasn't erotic, it was symbolic. And the church then accepted David as a symbol of, of embracing your faith in the darkest times.
Mm.
And it became a symbol of liberty, creativity, and intellectualism for Florence, which it still is to this day. And
Wow.
so when we study things that we don't understand, that's where the word enlightenment comes in. Darkness, people are afraid of it.
Yeah.
Darkness causes fear. It's the unknown, and light, the light of education, dispels the darkness, dispels the fear. And it's the same thing with spirit communication. It's the same thing with the afterlife, survival of consciousness, near death experiences. All of this is explainable through scientific evidence, which we are now
Hmm.
uncovering. So the fear of afterlife communication, the fear of near death experiences, I believe will be dispelled through the light of education.
I'm with you, and I agree. And you know what, people don't understand. I think just how powerful an emotion fear is. And just how I mean, look, this may come off as new agey, probably not to some of my listeners, some of my hardcore fans who are right there with me, but I mean, I've come to strongly believe in and experience the law of resonance, or the law of attraction, and just how capable we are as creators to begin to take responsibility and shape or reshape our reality as we would love to have it, to match ourselves. And I it's hard to go back, I think, when you start to experience how great of a creator that you are, that the you were, what's the word, you were gifted, your free will was gifted along with that capacity. And I believe that we all have this little spark of God, of the creator in us. And so
Yes.
even as we're here in these bodies, we are creating. We not just when we have children, but in our lives. And if you've ever had something that you thought of show up in front of you, close enough to the time you thought about it, you're like, how the heck? Well, people just chalk it up as coincidence, but of course, I think it's something much greater than that going on. But my question, Mark, is like, people who have and we have Hollywood who contributes to these fears, and there's a lot of reasons why we have such a pervasive fear structure in
Scary
our society.
cells. Scary
Basically,
cells.
yeah.
That's why people like roller coasters and
Yeah.
haunted houses and scary cells. Yeah.
But there has been phenomenon, like poltergeists and what people will call negative entities, which I think are just misunderstood. But you know, you
Yeah.
you must have some insight into kind of how, and I think in part, you do find what you're looking for, and you have certain people who go out with these beliefs about demons and what they're going to find. They open the door and invite those same kind of consciousness entities in. And I'm wondering, if you could share your insight about it, because I've always been curious about it, and I see a lot of people who fear this stuff because they think this is what's waiting for them on the other side.
Yeah, it's funny. I'm working on another article. I just finished the David article and submitted that, and I can't believe that. So my October article is called "The Great Ghost Hunt at the Haunted Stanley Hotel," and I was a speaker at a paranormal conference at the Stanley Hotel in Estes Park, Colorado, reputed to be one of the most haunted locations in North America. Woo! So I mean, that had to be my October article, because between Halloween and Dia de los Muertos, the Day of the Dead, that's the time you talk about these things.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe that paranormal investigation must be approached with the scientific method of objectivity without preconceived notions. And the investigators, like I was a speaker, and like we were doing the presentations during the day and ghost hunts at night. And the Stanley's great. It's Old West elegance and luxury, but it was built atop a limestone area that's loaded with quartz crystals, and it is believed that it's an energy vortex, which is like a whirlpool of energy that emits and holds more electromagnetic energy than other spots on Earth. Ergo, a vortex. It's where ley lines, Ley, ley lines intersect. Sedona is loaded with vortexes. The Giza Plateau, where the Great Pyramids in Egypt are, Stonehenge, a lot of these paranormal, supernatural, mystical hotspots, and I've been privileged to Machu Picchu to examine many of these, including the Stanley. So the electronic voice phenomenon, the K2 meters, the UHF, all these devices that the paranormal investigators use are designed to detect surges and fluctuations in electromagnetic energy, the various types, infrared, ultraviolet, radio waves. And I was there with my business manager, Rocky. She travels with me. She's awesome. And so one of the investigations, and then there was about 100 people there, so we're all split up in like groups of a dozen, and they rotate them around. So Rocky and I, we examined all the spots, and then so we end up in the tunnel beneath the Stanley. Well, you can see sparkles on the walls. It's loaded with quartz crystals. Now, quartz is an amplifier. Early crystal radios were a piece of quartz crystal with copper wires running low levels of electricity through it to amplify frequency. And as Faust explained earlier, the pineal gland in our brain, recent scientific studies have indicated it possesses magnetite and calcite crystals, magnetite having an electromagnetic field, calcite being a quartz crystal. So we have a radio station in our heads, and now when you're around a vortex, boom, it amplifies everything. So here we are, we're in the tunnel. We've been through a bunch of investigations, saw a lot of cool stuff, but we're all huddled around the K2 meters, the EVP, the ultraviolet. All of a sudden, everything goes off the scale. Well, Rocky, she's seen so many horror movies where, the Scooby-Doo crew, they're all in a cave and they're all looking in one place and the boogeyman sneaks up behind you. She figures she'd turn around. She goes, oh my God, everyone look. And we turn around, and at the far end of this tunnel, okay, this tunnel is beneath the Stanley in the middle of this limestone. There's this weird green light forming, and then it morphs into these undulating, looks like a ribbon, and it's coming along the side of the cave wall towards us. So one of the guys with us, he hits it with a flashlight, and he goes, this is no projection. He said, I know. He goes, I work in special effects at Disney. He goes, we can't do this. He goes, right. And we knew him, so we knew that he was credible. And of course, the ghost hunter goes, it's a demon. And I go, enough with the demons. I mean, so I'm walking right towards it. I'm going to walk. And everyone's like, don't do this. And Rocky's like, well, that's Mark, Yeah. And it's funny, though, because Faust, I'm coming right up to the anomaly. And then I'm thinking, well, maybe this isn't such a great idea. Because, anyway, the Catholic in me starts. And then a familiar presence was with me. And I go, Mom? It was my mother's spirit. And she said, Mark, it's not scary. You're fine. And then I'm thinking, well, my mom was a medium. She'd never miss out on anything as fun as a ghost hunt. So I walk into this undulating green light, and it was non-human. It was female. And then I realized I encountered this same type of energy when I was in England, but there they called it a fairy. Oh. And then it changed form. It looked like a giant lava lamp, and it started wafting towards the ghost hunter, and it engulfed him. And he goes, it's all over me. I go, calm down. I go, it's not an it. She is studying you. And he goes, why is she studying me? I go, well, aren't you studying her? He goes, well, I didn't think about that. I said, she's peaceful. She's harmless. But she's curious why we want to know so much about her. And then all of a sudden she pixelated and disappeared. And all the K2 meters went back to zero. Let me tell you, all the people, they're like, oh, this is the coolest thing I've ever seen. But what had happened was we share this dimension with other spiritual beings. And sometimes our frequencies intersect. The word fairy comes from the Celtic word for fair folk, which is used to describe beautiful supernatural beings. J.R. Tolkien, when he talks about the elves, Orlando Bloom and what's her name, Liv Tyler, beautiful people that glow, and they call them the fair folk. Well, I've been around the world studying different supernatural phenomenon, and in England, they call them fairies. Other places, like in the Nordic countries, they're elves. Ireland, leprechauns. Japan, the kami. Hawaii, the metahune. In the Middle East, the jinn. Elementals. They're elementals because they're not concerned with humans, but with nature, aka the elements. That's where they get the term elemental. Are non-human spiritual intelligence, and when people interact with them, like I did, the hair on the back of my neck went up, so I started getting scared because that's the same physiological response of fight or flight. but that's also the same physiological response when an electromagnetic field of a spirit interfaces with yours. And that's why people jump to the conclusion these are all evil and therefore demonic. And that's why when you're examining these entities, approach them with reverence and respect, analyze it, quantify the data, and then examine it afterwards instead of, it's a demon. Why is it a demon? Because you don't understand it.
Yeah.
And so that and let me tell you, I've encountered a lot of fascinating stuff in my life. And I was talking to Rocky about this yesterday, and she said, Mark, I will never forget that, because I've encountered elementals, but actually getting to see one.
Yeah.
And it's because we were in the dark tunnel, all this, and all day long and all night long, people are in there with all sorts of electronic equipment. And when I showed up, she knew that she could communicate with me. And it's like, why is everyone so interested? So what some people would immediately assume was a demon wasn't. It was just non-human spiritual intelligence that wasn't particularly interested in human beings, but basically would have preferred to have been left alone. So that's my take on it.
Fascinating. It's so easy to forget. I mean, until you find yourself alone in a woods that happens to have a lot of energy going, and you're like, what? I swear I just saw. God, must be losing it. It's like people pick up on these things and then they dismiss them, but as like a trick of the mind. But of course, we are on this dimension and we're not alone, and we were not the first ones to occupy this space. And then when you start to understand time and how it's something that we experience, but not something that we're bound to in a lot of ways,
right.
You start to realize, there's a constant interface. People are always like, well, where do these like every culture has these notions of fairies and dragons and so how do they all figure out, it's like, if they don't exist, how did they end up in the consciousness of all these different human cultures who for most part of history had no contact with each other?
Exactly.
Right?
And also most cultures have angels. And angels are always looked at as a very high frequency being of light. I mean, Buddhists have angels, Hindus have angels, Muslims have angels, certainly Christians have angels. Native Americans, like an eagle, would be considered an angelic entity, because angel comes from the Greek word anhelo, which means messenger of God. So in Native American symbolism, when there's an image of an eagle is a form of a messenger from the divine, from the great spirit. And it's interesting because in all the cultures, angels tend to have wings. Now, my belief for that is in when I've connected with angelic entities, they tend to look like an outline of a human, but be clear. They're like liquid beings that glow from the inside. So they have a humanoid appearance, and the light that emanates from them, from the area that you would consider to be shoulders, are light projections. And I can see how over the centuries, artists have depicted them as having wings. It's like in the background there, I have a statue of the Egyptian goddess Isis. I don't know if you can see that. But if you notice, Isis has this circle around her head. Well, that's an aura. Okay. Earlier, when we were talking about the electromagnetic soul and terminal lucidity, an aura is an energy field, a light bulb. Okay. The salt lamp behind you, it glows because that's the aura, the energy around it. And so highly evolved spiritual people tend to have very pronounced auras. So that's why in Christian art, in Buddhist art, in Hindu art, in ancient Egyptian art, in Greco-Roman art, in everybody's art, spiritual beings have this halo, which is essentially a very strong aura. And so when you begin to analyze this, these things didn't just happen. These are the efforts of humans to interpret energy, electromagnetic energy, things they don't necessarily understand. And once again, the benefit of living in the 21st century, provided we don't blast ourselves into nuclear particles, is that we now have developed the technology to examine these things.
Yes, it's and you really can start to see where the interpretation meets art, and manifests itself into the physical in one way, shape, or form, which is what I think the beauty of life is, if you were to be able to sum it up as like that's constantly what's happening. And I think and I hope that this material understanding that is kind of, we'll look back on this part of history and we'll understand it, for what it, and hopefully we'll study it so it doesn't happen again, and we'll start to, educate our young people about the true nature of reality. I dream about that world, and I have kids, and I'm constantly teaching them, to look with more than their eyes, and sense with more than their hands, and because I there's so much more to life than that. It's just right there. It's not a lot of
Yeah.
people are exposed and taught that. So
And a lot of people are not aware. When you're raised by a Navy SEAL like I was, everything was be aware, be aware. Look what walk into a public place, find out what's going on around you. And in the Afterlife Frequency, I write about spiritual situational awareness.
yeah,
Take not only the physical awareness, but then be sensitive to the spiritual influences around you. And I give the RAFT technique, how to recognize, accept, feel, and trust. And so I teach people how to expand that. But one of the downsides of our 21st century existence is everybody's glued to their phones and to social media. And I saw one of the funniest things on Facebook. It shows it's a public park and there's all these benches and everybody is looking at their cell phones. Everybody's texting on the cell phone. And in the background, Bigfoot's walking by. And the caption said, "This is why there have been no recent pictures of Bigfoot."
Yes. Oh
Nobody's
my God, that's
aware.
gold.
Take
Yeah.
the earbuds out. Okay, when you're in nature, you don't need to listen to music. Listen to the music of nature. Also, when you're outside, you're riding your bike and all that, you don't need earbuds. You need to hear what's going on around
That's
you.
right.
You don't need to be distracted. You need to visually be aware. You need to sense. And so when people start being plugged into all these devices constantly, what's happening is it is diminishing their situational awareness and inhibiting the next extension of that, which is the spiritual situational awareness. And so a lot of people say, well, I wish I could feel spirits. I wish I could feel spirits. It's like, well, cool it with all the distractions, unplug yourself and let it happen.
Yeah, maybe stop playing Angry Birds nonstop, or whatever this whatever the game is they're making billions off of every, it changes all the time.
I have too much to do. I don't
I hear
engage
you.
in those type of things.
Who would benefit most from reading your book, Mark? What would you say?
I would say anybody interested in understanding that there is more to our existence than the physical, and to understand that we have but one life and it is eternal. And so the afterlife frequency is an adventure, because I was overrun by too many boring books in the practice of law and in law school. So I promise that will not happen to you. But I want to explain to everyone that God exists, that the afterlife exists, that we can communicate with spirits because they're immortal living beings, and that we'll be reunited in the light when it is our time to leave this world. And I do this on the basis of science. And where this all came from, when I was 8 years old, I remember talking to my dad, and we were looking at the stars, and he worked in aerospace. He knew astronauts, so he was my hero. And we were looking at the stars, and he said, "There are no such thing as mysteries. There are only questions for which we do not yet have the answer. And enough funding, research, and dedication goes into anything, Mark, we'll come up with an explanation." and it will be based on science. And so
Mm.
that is one of the factors that went into me writing the Afterlife Frequency, is to explain all the different forms of spirit communication, mediumship, visitations, which may be a dream or you feel them around you, near-death experiences, shared-death experiences, deathbed visions, terminal lucidity, out-of-body experiences, because there is a rational explanation for all of them, and it is based on my electromagnetic soul theory.
I love it. I can't. I'm excited to finish the second half of the book. The fact that you give people, the means to begin to develop an awareness and technique to do this themselves. And it's like anything else. If you just start practicing a little bit, you'll start to experience it. And people are going to run into themselves because, of course, it's easy to dismiss then what you're picking up. But if you are willing to take the step and have the courage to trust yourself, you're going to be shocked what you're capable of. I think most
Yes.
people will
Yes.
be. It's the self-doubt and the self-ridicule that some of us get programmed with, that kind of gets in the way of further expansion. You really that's why it's all, I think, a spiritual journey, because you get the more love you have for yourself, the more healing you do from whatever
Yes.
trauma or karma you've come from, the more you can allow for all these wonderful things that are happening. And I catch myself sometimes being like, am I really lucky? Am I too lucky? Is something going to happen to me tomorrow? It's like these thoughts just come up, and it's like, how can all this good stuff be happening to me? Like, and then I'm like, that's an old Catholic thought, dude. You know what I mean? Like that you're not worthy, and that this is the only reason why this is happening to you is probably because your ticket's going to be punched.
That does so much damage to people. We're all sinners. You're bad. Original
so
sin. Stop that. It messes people up. It frightens people. It screws them up. It gives them self-esteem issues.
Yeah.
Jesus taught with love. How many times in all of Jesus's teachings did he say, "Fear not"? Fear is a terrible thing.
It is.
And I know there's a lot of people in the new age, fear, false evidence appearing real. Well, let me tell you something. Having a fear of sticking your hand in a bucket full of live rattlesnakes, I think, is pretty damn logical. All right. So you can't do these, and this is from my legal background, you can't give these blatant general as all fear bad, all love good. Oh, so falling in love with a sociopath is a good thing? It's like, come on now, fear is a negative factor in our lives, but it's also a reality. And sometimes fear is a teacher so that we do not repeat the same disastrous and harmful behaviors. And love is what makes life worth living, but you've got to also be discerning with your love, not with your family members, not with your partner, but like I said, falling in love with a sociopath, falling in love with somebody that has severe addiction problems. Yes, you may love that person, and we've all seen the movies where, oh yes, I will inspire you with my love.
Right.
Look, I practice law, and I'm not doing it now, but I've seen so many people that just end up in a dysfunctional relationship where all they're doing is enabling the alcoholic, the addict, the hardened criminal who just takes, gives nothing back in return but misery. So is that love? Well, it started out as love, and then it's turned into something disastrous. So with love should be unconditional. I love you, and I don't expect anything, but if you love me and don't expect anything, then that's how love works properly. But if the love means I love you so much, I'm constantly bailing you out of jail, taking you the rehab centers that
Letting
you
you
always
hit
run
me.
away from. Yes, letting you hit me because it was my
That's how
fault. I
much I
didn't.
love you.
That's how much I love you. I mean,
Yeah.
it's like, no, that's not love.
No, it's not. But love is a great teacher. It can be a great teacher, and it's part and parcel with our evolution, right? And I think that when you realize that and you learn from love, like sometimes you have to learn from fear,
Yeah.
then it's served its purpose, and it allows for then a greater experience the next relationship you have, because that's how we learn in relationship to things and to people, and whether it's love or sometimes the opposite, there's always something to be gained from it that will allow you to better traverse next time.
Well,
But some people don't get the message, and then
you
they got their
know,
own things going on, and so they're stuck in a relationship. I'm like, dude, you're miserable, she's miserable, why? Why would you continue like this? Oh man.
well, Faust, I can't thank you enough for having me on. This has just been really wonderful, and it,
Amazing.
yeah, if any of the listeners, if you want to find out about booking a session with me, or signing up for my newsletter, or my weekly show, The Psychic and the Doc, which I co-host with Dr. Pat Basili. She's a world-renowned behavioral psychologist, and people call in, and I do mini readings in tandem with her uplifting insights. Please visit my website, afterlifefrequency.com. Just like my book, Afterlife Frequency. That's the way it's easy.
Mm-hmm.
Afterlifefrequency.com. And also you'll see there how to subscribe to Best Holistic Life magazine, wonderful magazine that I'm honored to be one of the featured columnists for. And Faust, I want to thank you again for having me on the show. I hope someday to return. I look forward to it.
Absolutely, that would be amazing. I would love to have you on again. I'm going to include a link in my video description. You guys will be able to click right on it, go right to Mark's site, buy this man's book. It's awesome. I'm literally going to pick it up later today because I am into it. I mean, so much to it. You can't go wrong there. You'll find a link to that as well in the video description. Mark, I so appreciate your time, man. I all your insight. This was so cool. I had a great time, and I hope you did too. And love
Oh,
to have you on
absolutely.
again.
Oh yeah,
You know,
look forward to it.
it'd be great. You take care, and thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you. God bless.
Thanks, brother.